want to maybe ask Professor Walton, you had mentioned that in some ways, one of the 4 points that you made about the civil society and how to really mobilize that sector in terms of organizations, that I took it to mean not necessarily part of the government, because when we're talking about rights and enforcement, this seems to be more of a governmental issue. But I think people also enforce in the non-government sector. But maybe you could speak a little bit about that second point and any other thing that you would like to build on what Professor Face is saying. You have to unmute.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. A few things I was thinking of. I would agree that the issue of integration is very much about rights. And of course, again, that speaks to the diversity of those who we consider migrants, because the right of the migrant is wrapped up in all of these issues of diversity: the occupation, the status, the location, where are you moving from, where are you moving to? And so my own research has looked at international health worker migrants as well as international students. And of course, that, again, there's an enormous complexity within that. So I could talk about that and then maybe say a word about the civil society issue, if that's okay. I mean, some of the interesting things I've been paying attention to, of course, is, and I would concur that it's difficult to try and plan what the long-term consequence of COVID-19 is going to be beyond the enormous disruption that we have witnessed and experienced. But certainly healthcare worker migrants have become really visible during this crisis. And countries such as the UK and the USA and my own country, Canada, people have become much more aware of the fact that their healthcare systems are staffed by a globally sourced labour market, a labour supply. And so those workers are most likely not going to be subject to kind of return, because their skills are highly required now. Although I would say there is some concern still about their ability to have those rights that allow for integration in the source country where they are. And we've seen some of those debates with the NHS. Within, though, healthcare workers, one group that is perhaps more susceptible to this disruption linked to COVID is the international students. So India, for example, about 18,000 Indian students are studying in China and Central Europe. Many of them are studying for medical degrees. The likelihood of their studies being disrupted by this and then having to return is more likely. And of course, their integration will be very difficult because they are already getting their credentials in other places, and the Indian government doesn't necessarily recognize those credentials. So you'll have a group of young people, primarily young people, whose career development will be truncated. And so how will those individuals manage if they are forced to come back? And then this speaks somewhat to those local civil society institutes. So certainly we have heard about the important work that's been done by panchayats at the local level. And we've heard about some, stellar evidence of kind of disaster planning and relief that's occurred within Kerala, especially women's organizations. So at the local level, especially for the sort of the less skilled internal migrant workers and others, I mean, this provisioning of basic, food and shelter and organizing a humane system of quarantine is absolutely necessary and has sadly not been fulfilled in an adequate, coordinated manner in many examples within India. But we are seeing some work done at the local level by those institutions. And so certainly in terms of the state and forms of governance, this is where they need to direct some of their attention in the immediate response and probably in the longer term as they deal with this significant disruption to labour market experience.
Thank you, Professor Walton.